Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. This is a video that I've been promising for a while. In this video, I'm going to show you how I create and draw custom airplane illustrations and how I use those to design paint schemes for the airplanes that I build. A lot of you guys have been asking me what program I use to create these illustrations, and that is Paint Shop Pro X4. It's an older program, but it works perfectly for what I use it for. When I bought my Zenith Cruiser kit, one of the first things I did was start making illustrations of it to design different paint schemes. Now, some of them I liked, some of them I didn't. You can see some of them here. But as you guys probably know by now, eventually I settled on the Blue Angels paint scheme. And the first thing I did was draw that on the illustration. And as you can see, the airplane looks just like the drawing. Now, after hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of practicing drawing these illustrations and really learning the fine details to make these look realistic, because so many people are asking me to create custom illustrations for them, I started a little website called aerodraw.com, and I started making some custom illustrations for people. Some of the ones I've made are a 320 Airbus for a pilot at Spirit. Some of the other airliners I just kind of made for fun, but I made a business jet for a buddy of mine. This Stearman was a custom one I did for a customer. The Rotorway 162 helicopter I did. And then somebody asked me if I could draw a motorcycle. And I figured, well, if I could do an airplane, why not a motorcycle? So I did the motorcycle, and the motorcycle was the last one I ever did for hire because it was so labor intensive to make. I never wanted to do another one again. One of the other ones I did was this Quad City Challenger for a guy. And I like to put a lot of detail into them, like you can see the headset hanging off the side of the fuselage here. So obviously I've done a lot of the home-built airplanes. These are some Vans RVs that I've drawn. When I was building my RV7, this is one of the schemes I was going to use for that airplane. Here's a Pit Special scheme on an RV8. RV12, and another scheme I designed for the RV7 was this old school Thunderbirds paint scheme with the silver fuselage. I did an Army one for an RV8. Then I did my buddy's Kit Fox. And then I saw this float plane Kit Fox on a ramp one time. I took a picture of it so I could draw that. I've done some of the RANS airplanes. Here's an S7, an S19, and then here's another S19 with a different military scheme. And then after I built my RANS S6, I made an illustration of that airplane. And I've also done some other general aviation airplanes like Cetabrias, a Lake, some Pipers. Here's a first one I did with the chrome spinner, so that was kind of fun to do. And then of course I've drawn my Mooney, but it's not done yet. I still have to make the horizontal stabilizer and the front nose gear, and then also some detail on the bottom of the wing. After a while I started doing caricature airplanes because to me they're just a lot more fun. This is a caricature of my Cherokee 160 that I owned for 3 or 4 years. And then after that, here's some more different caricature airplanes that I drew. And of course I had to draw the Zenith Super Duty. Now this drawing was actually a commission from Amelia's Landing Hotel. So if you're ever at that hotel in Texas, in one of the rooms you'll see this picture hanging there. Now probably some of the most fun airplanes I think to draw are the military ones, because there's so many graphics and markings on them that really make it look cool. Here's a look at some of the military ones that I've made. Now, a lot of people will draw these with the gear up, but I like to draw them with the gear down because I like to put a lot of detail into the landing gear. This is obviously the main gear on the F-15, and this is the nose gear on the F-15 also. This is the Thunderbird's F-16, but I've never finished the tail on this one just yet. Now this was a different technique I was trying. I was trying to make a picture at night and trying to make the lights look realistic. In just a minute, when I show you how I create these illustrations, you're going to hear me talk about everything being done in layers. And you can think of a layer as a piece of paper, or better yet, a transparency. So each transparency or each layer or each sheet of paper stacked on top of each other has something different on it. Like one layer might have the tire. The next layer might have an Air Force emblem. The next layer might have the shading on the airplane or a shadow or the paint scheme. And when you lay all of those transparencies on top of each other and you look down at it, you get a complete picture. So to explain layers, let me show you the P-51. Here is a P-51 drawn with the landing gear down or extended. And by drawing a fuel tank on a separate layer, I can insert that layer and add a fuel tank to the bottom of the wing. I can also delete that layer and take the fuel tank back off of the wing. Also, with the landing gear drawn on a separate layer, I can delete that layer and have the airplane flying with the gear up. Same way, I can add the fuel tank layer back in, and now the gear is up with the fuel tank on the bottom of the plane. Now, if I delete all of the paint scheme layers, then I'm left with a blank template that I can use to create other P-51s with any kind of paint scheme that I want. Okay, next I want to show you now how I actually create these illustrations. But keep in mind, I'm not trying to teach you how to make these in this video. This is just showing you quickly some of the steps that are required to get the end product. We're going to start by looking at a picture of this Mooney. Now, all of these illustrations start out with a photograph, unless you're doing a caricature. So getting the proper photograph could be a whole video in itself, but for now, let's just look at a picture of this Mooney that I took. This is the very start of an illustration. What I do is I upload this photo into the software, the Paint Shop Pro X4, and by using a tool in the software, I basically trace every line on this airplane and come out with an outline. Well, now that we have the outline drawn, I'm going to show you how I do all the other layers to make an illustration. I wish that I could just record it from my screen, but my video editing software is on my Mac, and the software that I use for the illustrations is on this old PC. So what I'm going to do is just point the camera at the screen and talk you through drawing an illustration. So step one is to upload the photo into the software. That's done. I've created another layer called line on the right hand side of the screen. You can see that. And that's just going to be the layer that I draw the outline. And first step to do this is to take this photo, and I'm just going to change the opacity of it so it's very dim, and this just makes it easier to see the lines that I'm actually drawing. I'm going to click black for the color, and then I'm going to go back to my line layer, and what I'm going to do on the left side of the screen over here is click this pen tool, and that's what lets me draw lines. So to get started here, I'm just going to show you how I do this. What I'll do is I'm going to trace this pilot side window. And I've made the line a lot thicker than it normally would be, just because it's going to be easier for you to see on the screen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start at the top curve of the window. So I'm going to click on here, click on this side, and then I'm going to move my mouse, and the way I move that mouse lets me select the curve of that line. So I can click once, click twice, make a curve like that. I can make a curve like this. I can just draw a straight line like that. So to continue onto the back of the window, I'll click here, and it looks like it goes down to the wing. And then from there, it follows the curve of the wing down. There to the front of the window, from here up to the top. Those are all pretty much straight lines. Now what I'll do is I'll come back and zoom in here just to get the corners. There's that corner. Zoom in over here. And just real quickly there. It didn't line up perfectly, but that's that corner. And then that front, the window there is done. Now what I do is I'd go through the entire airplane, all around the wing, the flaps, ailerons, gear door, the wheels, the antennas, all the panel lines on the airplane. I trace every line on the airplane, and that's how I get this outline drawn. This is probably the most time-consuming part of a new project because it takes forever. As you can see, every little line has to be drawn. Now, in order to show you some of the other steps, I'm going to use the F-16 photo or drawing that I made just because it's easier to show you those steps on here than it is something like that white Mooney. So this is the finished illustration you're seeing on the screen. What I'm going to go do next is I'm going to delete every single layer except that outline layer. Okay, all of the layers, they're not really deleted, I just have them hidden right now. And you can see I have the outline up on the screen. I don't have the wheels on here because that's a separate layer, but this whole outline is what's drawn on one layer. So you can see all the panel lines and every little detail line that's in there. And if you look on the right side of the screen over here, you can see as I scroll down here, I have probably about, I don't know, 50 or 70 layers here or something and everything that's drawn on this airplane is a different layer. For example, if I turn on these two layers, you can start to see the two different shades of gray for the paint scheme. I can hide those layers and take them off. But let me show you real quick here how I get that first color layer. Okay, I've zoomed in here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to color the nose. So the first thing I do is I go select the proper tool on the left-hand side. I select the layer that I want to draw it on. And there's a couple different ways you can do this. This is the fastest, quickest way right here. I just blob it on like that. But then if I go back over here on the right side of the screen and I click on my line layer, I will use this little magic wand and I click on the outside of the airplane. And that highlights everything on the outside of that line layer. I go back to my color layer. I can take my eraser tool and just go through and erase everything I don't want on there. Now, if I go back to the line layer, click that tool, these two panels right here, I don't want that gray on there. So I've selected those also. Then on the right side of the screen, I go back to that gray layer, I hit my eraser tool, and I can erase that. So that's how now you can see the color is on the nose there. Now I would do the exact same thing to get the rest of the color. So the whole F-16 here has this base color of light gray, and then if I just turn on this other layer, you can see that I've already drawn a darker layer of gray. But the thing that I want to show you mostly is you can see how this really just looks two-dimensional. There's nothing here to give it any kind of, say, a 3D effect. Now, one of the other things you want to consider making these illustrations is basically where the sun is shining on the airplane. And when I draw these, I always consider the sun to be on the top left side of the screen. So I'm going to turn on a layer called shadow. And you can see what this does is it brings down a shadow. Now, of course, I already drew this, so it doesn't do it for you, but you see how I've added a shadow here? So if the sun is coming from here to here, you're going to have this shadow under the wing. You're going to have this shadow under the horizontal stabilizer. So that starts to give it a little bit of depth. And then I can do other layers here. Let me just turn these on and show you. If I do the shading and highlights, you can see how now the F-16 has a very 3D and lifelike image to it instead of just being a 2D, just regular straight gray. So if I turn off those layers again, let me show you how I do that. So now that I have the two-dimensional colors in here, this is just regular colored layer, there's nothing special about it. I want to show you how I get those shadows and highlights to kind of give it that 3D effect or just give it that depth. So everything I do, I use the mouse. So you can think of the mouse as an airbrush. And I have a tool up here. I can select different sizes of the airbrush. So if I have my gray color, I can just draw lines like this, right? But if I turn down the hardness of that, see how this line here looks, if hopefully you can see on the monitor, see how it's a lot smoother? The edges are a lot fuzzier like that. And then I can also turn down the opacity of that, so I can draw it like that and it starts to get a lighter color. So let me just get rid of all this junk. So now if I, on the right side of the screen, I go up to my line layer, I go up to my magic wand tool, and I'm going to select all the areas in my line drawing that I want to include this, what I call shading. So I've selected that. I'll go down to my layer. I'm going to click my airbrush tool. And again, you see this red circle on my screen. I can make that bigger or smaller depending how I want it. In fact, I think I'm going to make it a little bit bigger for now. And now what I do is I've turned down the opacity and the hardness of this airbrush tool, and I'm just going to slide it along the bottom like that. And what's going to happen is the paint on the top of this circle will fill in on the airplane and give it that darker bottom that you would see. So I like to start from the left to the right, and I just go through like this, and you can see how the bottom of that airplane is a little bit darker now, right? If I undo that, and let's say I do it I set the airbrush wrong, let's say, and I have it too dark and too hard, and I do that again, well, now you see how really dark that gets. It's, you know, obviously very unrealistic. So part of the key to learning how to do these is to figure out how to get it just right so that it looks real without overdoing it to where it doesn't really look real. So once I do that, I could even go back and take this down a little bit more, maybe make it just a hair darker. And if I zoom in here, I might want to go around just the very bottom back in here and make the bottom a little bit darker there like that. And then when I zoom back out, you can see what it looks like there. Now, if I take this layer back off, by the time I'm done doing all that, and again, I'm just doing it really quickly just to show you, but it turns out looking like this. Let me get rid of that. You can see how that's the finished product there. I've done the very bottom around here. So now you have the shading layer, I call it. But if I add on, now all I do is I change the color of the paint back to white, and I'll do the highlight layer, which would be the top, because remember the sun's coming from the top down, so the top area is going to be a little bit lighter than the bottom. The bottom will be a little bit darker. So instead of, I do that the exact same way, but instead of drawing it, I'll just turn back on the layer that I've already done. And you can notice the whole tail and everywhere on the airplane, if I take it on, or there's off and then on, you can see how it really lightens things up and gives it a different effect. Here's a little bit more, if you could just tell the shading layer there. Now, one of the other things I want to show you here is if I zoom into this gun port here, remember the F-16 has a gun on the side right here. And I want to show you what that would look like after it's drawn. So now you can see see how it gives it a little bit more of a, I don't want to say 3D effect, but it gives it some depth in there. And I do that the same way. I just create a little bit of a shadow on the bottom, which is right there. And I take the highlighting tool and highlight the top. And now it goes from just perfectly flat to having a 3D effect like that. And then somewhere in here, I actually have the gun layer there. Let's see if I can find that real quick. That's one of the problems too on the right side of the screen here, is going through these layers when you want to turn layers on and off. Having so many different layers, sometimes it's hard to find what you're looking for. So here's the gun. So here's, if you look right here where actually the gun port is, all I did was I colored it a real light gray, and I created a kind of a shadow on top to give it that effect. And then also, you can see right on the front here, when they fire these guns, you get a lot of that carbon and stuff on the side of the fuselage. So I've added a dirty spot there. And if I zoom out here, you can kind of see what that looks like. I think on my monitor, or on the camera, it's looking really dark. So hopefully that comes out looking realistic on the screen, but it might be a little bit darker on the camera. So, but anyway, so that kind of shows you, here I have the whole body of the fuselage. And then from there on, it's just a matter of adding all the details like the landing gear, all the markings. So like right now you can see this is just a regular gray F-16. I can put any kind of tail markings on the tail that I want. So just by adding and deleting the layers. So anyway, that's just real quickly how you color in a drawing, how you give it some highlights and some shadows and shading to give it a more of a 3D effect, or just to give it some depth. So now, learning how we did this, let's start drawing the Zenith Super Duty.